Today, we've got our last installment on Rousseau, or on Rousseau's second discourse on the origins of inequality. Um, don't forget that we're skipping Émilie du Châtelet in the syllabus, and we're going to go right to Kant on Monday for the beginnings of the grounding of the metaphysics of morals. So where are we then after the end of part one in Rousseau? So let me sum up a little bit and we'll move on. The human animal in the state of nature is pure potential. It is free, free to choose whatever it wants to become, free to do whatever it wishes to do. And it is perfectible. So it can grow, it can learn, it can develop. And those developments are transmissible to future generations. So there is nothing inevitable about this process. Humans could have turned out to be something quite different than they are. But this is the process that happened, and this is where we got. We were not determined in this way. Nature did not make us become like this. We chose. Every one of these steps in the process was the product of a free choice on our part, and we could have chosen to do differently. So we're free to become anything, and that means that we are sort of infinitely malleable, right? We can become just about anything. For Rousseau, you might say, and this is a question that you need to think about, we might even say that the acquired characteristics that we've accumulated over time, in some sense, are natural because we had the capacity to do that. They are in accord with our nature. They're artificial, but only artificial in the sense that we weren't born with them. But is an acquisition the same as a natural characteristic? Maybe it is. So what it turns out we acquire, though, is culture or history. You could say history is the record of our accumulating different characteristics and different traits, right? And passing them on, right? History is not just transmissible, but we're born into a history. We're born into a culture with a capital C that limits what we can do, right? And again, as I said last time, this is what Marx talked about when he spoke of species freedom, right? As a species, we're free to become anything. As individuals, we're limited by the culture that we grow up in, its history, and so on. And we'll see some more about that today. All right. It's important to understand that culture with a capital C only becomes possible after Rousseau. That's a hard thing to understand because it seems so obvious to us that American culture is different from German culture or Russian culture or something like that. But Rousseau was the first one really to see this and to give it life in political theory. So people who talk about culture are talking about something fundamentally different from what everybody up to Rousseau understood as being the grounding of human life. So once we become cultural animals and not, or historical animals, right, and not natural animals, then we talk about ourselves in a different way. And this is why many on the right, you don't hear so much about this nowadays, but you used to hear quite a lot about it on the right, right, that everything went wrong with Rousseau. Before Rousseau, life was good and theory was good. Since Rousseau, theory has been a hopeless muddle because it doesn't impose any limits on human nature or on the human character. So this is a problem, and others are later going to try to work this out and see. But notice what we've got here, right? So for Plato and Aristotle, and even to some degree for Hobbes and Locke, right? You've got nature with a capital N as being the thing that shapes human morality. That's where morality comes from. Now, Hobbes and Locke weaken that, but they don't go so far. They don't go as far as Rousseau does in saying that it's cultural. Rousseau says it's cultural, or it's historical. History with a capital H, right? So we've got three possible sources of obligation or of limits on human action, right? God, of course, nature through Plato and Aristotle, and history or culture from Rousseau. Nietzsche's going to complain about this. Nietzsche's going to say, why do people always want to go outside of us for the origins of morality? And that's an interesting question, but we're not going to try to answer it today. We're going to try to explore Rousseau. So part 2, where does society begin? Civil society begins when somebody says, this is mine, right? Possession. Now, notice that society has to have developed fairly far in this regard. For Hobbes and Locke, I'll just cut to the chase. For Hobbes and Locke, civil society is a response to a problem that nature has posed for us. For Rousseau, civil society is a response to a problem that we've created for ourselves. Property, possession, possessiveness. This is mine, right? That for Rousseau is not innate, not natural, it's learned, it's acquired, it's invented in some sense, okay? People are shocked by this to some degree. Yeah, not enough to give him the prize, but they're shocked by this. So we've got this problem, right? That instead of being a technology that we use to control the natural tendencies of human nature, government becomes, or civil society becomes, a technology that we use to control the problems that we have learned, created for ourselves, okay? So this is what he means in that first paragraph of part 2, right? The idea of property, depending on many prior ideas which could only have arisen successively, was not formed all at once in the human mind. Something happens, right? There's a sort of a break when somebody says, this is my property. So again, the sentiment of existence for Rousseau is fundamental. Existence is the experience of existence is our primary experience, our primary passion. So again, on 852 and 853, he's describing the development of the mind, and how the mind progresses to the idea of property. So first you have to have an idea of self-esteem, and then you have an idea of esteem in the eyes of others, society. So human relations are necessary. You have to have foresight. You have to know that property is important to providing for the future. You have to believe in a future. right? He said, Rousseau says primitive humans don't understand the future, right? Like the Carib Islander who sells his bedding in the morning because he has no idea that he's going to want it for sleeping that night. That's how innocent they are. But as this innocence falls away, as this creation of a human persona comes about, we gradually lose the sense of naivete in a way. Okay. Rousseau doesn't like that. I mean, Rousseau says this is, we're making the species worse as we do this and not better. So, beginning of the family, right? All of these things are occurring before civil society is formed. In this sense, his chronology agrees with Locke's, right? That we have, yes, we've made civil society. Yes, we intended to make civil society. And it's a fairly late development. Lots of things have developed first. Self-esteem, community, society, the family, right? And culture is beginning to form as well. Now, notice what he says. I think it's interesting what he says on 853 in the second column. The paragraph that begins, "In this new state with a simple and solitary life, they enjoyed conveniences and entertainments unknown to their fathers." But then look what he goes on to say a little bit further, right? When they lose them, being deprived of them was much more cruel than possessing them was sweet. Right? Think about something that you have been deprived of at some point, that you were used to having. And it feels cruel to have been deprived of that. And this is the experience that he is talking about. So over on the top of 854, in the paragraph that continues from the previous page, we've got nationalism for the first time, right? History, culture, nationalism, all three go together. They're inextricable, right? Eventually forming in each country, he says, a particular nation united by mores and characteristic feelings, not by regulations and laws, but by the same kind of life and foods, and by the common influence of the climate, right? You've probably heard me say before, the Romans had an institution called the Pantheon. In fact, it still exists in Rome, quite a spectacular building. In it, they kept the gods of all of the cultures that they had conquered and absorbed into the Roman Empire. And the idea was to honor those gods, to remind the people that those gods lived on, but also to make it clear that they were subject to Rome. We too have a pantheon, but ours is a Rousseauan pantheon, right? And our pantheon is the food court at any airport or at the mall or something like that, right? Malls hardly exist anymore. Airports are disappearing, but you have enough experience of them. And by the time I get students who didn't have them, I'll be retired. But the food court at the mall, right? I mean, think about it. As we have colonized separate cultures, we bring their cuisine back and we feed it to ourselves. So there's Mexican cuisine, there's Italian cuisine, right? Chinese food, there's Indian food. You name it, it's there. And of course, American food, all of which is adapted from other cultures anyway. And so that's our center of worship. And of course, the mall is our center of worship in the United States now. And so the food court is the central piece of American culture. So Rousseau is onto something here, right? This idea of culture as the characteristic thing that shapes us, So people begin to want to cultivate self-esteem and so forth and so on. So again, this notion that culture is the determining factor is important. Things eventually come to possess us rather than the other way around. Self-love, right? All of this stuff. What does it say? Oh, yeah. And the paradox is that our power weakens us, right? So the more powerful we grow, the more things that we have, the more possessions that we cultivate, the more we depend on that, and the weaker we become, right? So we've got an axe, so it's harder to break sticks because we're just not strong enough. We've got bows and arrows and javelins and all of those things that we use to throw at prey, and so we can't run as fast. We also don't have to cooperate as much when we do this. So the technology then becomes a way of creating substitutes for the natural characteristics of human beings. So you begin to get, as society develops, right? This is still on 854. As society develops, you begin to get things like politeness, civility, concern for others, concern for their feelings, right? You don't want to step on their toes. You don't want to insult them, right? So, and that too is a kind of deterioration of the human character, Rousseau says. He sums that up on 855, right? So many steps toward the perfection of the individual, and in fact, toward the decay of the species, right? Again, species freedom. The species is free to become anything. We individuals are limited by our culture. The freer we are, the less that we are able to contribute to the progress of the whole, if that makes sense. So, but see, that's the tension, right? That's the rub right there, is the sort of friction between individual humans and society. And Rousseau identifies this as the primary concern of political theory, obviously, but also of society more generally. So, partly because, as he says on 855, partly because this leads to a disappearance of equality. Natural man is equal because nobody has abilities, possessions, things that are not owned by all and used by all. But, he says, as soon as one man needed the help of another, as soon as one man realized that it was useful for a single individual to have provisions for two, equality disappeared. Property came into existence, labor became necessary. So, unlike Locke, right, labor is not necessary by nature. Labor is not the title to property. Rousseau severs those. And Rousseau thinks that Locke has made a very big mistake by equating labor and property. And he proposes that we think very carefully about that, right? And if necessary, we just do away with it altogether. Okay. Right, metallurgy and agriculture, right? So it's not gold and silver, it's not any of those things. In this sense, by the way, note that Rousseau really agrees with the economists that money, gold, precious metals, gold, silver, etc., are not the measure of an economy. What's the measure of an economy is how much steel it produces, how much wheat it produces, and so forth. So, but this is all accelerating, right? So you reach a point where things may have been developing for hundreds of thousands of years very slowly, but you begin to reach a point, and metallurgy and agriculture seem to point very clearly towards that. You reach a point where progress begins to accelerate. And as it begins to accelerate, the inequalities in society increase. And Rousseau says this is a real problem. So, okay. So property, rules of justice, all of this stuff. I think most of this is pretty clear. I don't have a lot to say about it. But it leads to friction, right? It leads to competition. And so how you secure the advantages to yourself, or more importantly, perhaps, how you keep what's yours, what you have created, what you have made. How do you make sure that you keep it safe? You keep it distant from the threat of other people. This is when human beings become dangerous to each other. Human beings are not dangerous to each other in the state of nature because they don't think about each other carefully enough to worry about it. But now they do, right? Now they have to keep things safe, right? So this is where Hobbes's idea of a state of nature comes in. It's not until this stage, Rousseau says, that humans arrive at that Hobbesian moment where it's a war of each against all. This is a particular problem for the wealthy. And so in this sense, right, Hobbes, Rousseau says, he's not problematic, but he's speaking for a particular group, right? And so this is where I think people begin to notice that Hobbes is actually talking about middle-class Englishmen, right? People with property, people with something to preserve in society. For Rousseau, who's writing in France, the social gap is much wider than certainly the social gap that he sees is much wider than the gap in England. The gap between the upper aristocracy in France and the not just the peasantry, but the many poor, the canaille in Paris and elsewhere, who are simply destitute, and they keep breeding and so forth and making themselves more miserable. And so for Hobbes, this social war is a little bit different, presents itself to Rousseau a little bit differently than it does to Hobbes. And England was a somewhat more egalitarian state or egalitarian society, partly because the wealthy were better at hiding their wealth, I think. Top of 857, second column, horrified by the newness of the ill, both the poor man and the rich man hoped to flee from wealth, hating what they had once prayed for. You want to overcome scarcity, right? You want to be able to plan for the future, and you want to be assured of having a future. But Rousseau says there comes a point, this war, this internecine war, makes it a burden. And so they want to get rid of it. And as he goes on to say, the rich in particular must have soon felt how disadvantageous to them it was to have a perpetual war in which they alone paid all the costs, and in which the risk of losing one's life was common to all. and the risk of losing one's goods was personal. Um, and so, right, uh, the rich, pressed by necessity, finally conceived the most thought out project that ever entered the human mind. It was to use in his favor the very strength of those who attacked him, to turn his adversaries into his defenders, to instill in them other maxims, and to give them other institutions which were as favorable to him as natural right was unfavorable to him. This is where government starts, right? So government starts effectively in a conspiracy of the wealthy to make sure that they keep their wealth. They don't care so much, or Rousseau doesn't make it hostile to those who don't have wealth, right? As long as they don't take any of mine, it's okay. Whatever you want. So 858, first column, right? Let us unite, he says to them, in order to protect the weak from oppression, restrain the ambitious, and assure everyone of possessing what belongs to him. Let's institute rules of justice and peace to which all will be obliged to conform, which will make special exceptions for no one, and which will in some way compensate for the caprices of fortune by subjecting the strong and the weak to mutual obligation. Rousseau says this had to be the strong. This is not the weak saying, oh, please, protect me, don't oppress me, right? This is the strong saying, we need this to protect everyone, and not saying, I need it to protect me. And what did they do? They all ran to chain themselves in the belief that they secured their liberty, for although they had enough sense to realize the advantages of a political establishment, they did not have enough experience to foresee its dangers. So Rousseau begins the social contract by saying, man is born free and is everywhere in chains. Turns out from the second discourse that those chains are voluntary. Those chains are sought by us as a means to ensure that those of us who have property are able to keep it, regardless of whatever consequences that might be. So for the profit of a few ambitious men, this is bottom of the first column on 858. For the profit of a few ambitious men, henceforth subjected the entire human race to labor, servitude, and misery. Well, there you are. Right? There are a few exceptions. Most people, Rousseau says, are subject to these kinds of concerns. Natural compassion is superseded by the social substitute for natural compassion. But morality, right, or an exemption from sort of cultural categories, Rousseau says, exist only in a few great cosmopolitan souls, right? So here we go, right? The opposition between cosmopolitan on the one hand and culturally determined on the other, right? So cosmopolitan souls can rise above this, can achieve a better understanding, can achieve Rousseau's understanding of what morality is, where it comes from, why it's cultural, and all of those things. Everybody else is just mired in culture. Everybody else is stuck in the culture that they possess. So these few cosmopolitan souls, right? There's a handful of philosophers who are exempt from this. Why? Nobody knows, but they are. And those are the ones who have the right to speak on moral things. So for Rousseau, the social contract is a conspiracy of the rich, right? It is a problem for the poor, right? And they must have been fooled, as he says on 859, since the poor, this is point 3, since the poor had nothing to lose but their liberty, it would have been utter folly for them to have voluntarily surrendered the only good remaining to them, getting nothing in return. But that's essentially what they did. So it was a fraud. It was a false promise that was made by the wealthy. Okay. And again, I'd like to hear your comments on all of this in the forum, please. So, where do we want to go next? Oh yeah. So over on 861. So the rest of this I think is pretty straightforward. And again, ask me if you've got questions, email or put something in the forum. 861 in the second column. This column, the paragraph that begins without entering at present into the investigations, right? The establishment of body politics is a true contract between the populace and the leaders. And again, notice that Rousseau doesn't fall for the Hobbes thing, that this is a contract only among the governed. This is a contract between governors and governed. But he goes on to say, since, with respect to social relations, the populace has united all its wills into a single one, all the articles on which this will is explicated become so many fundamental laws, obligating all the members of the state without exception. And one of these regulates the choice and power of the magistrates charged with watching over the execution of the others. There's a lot in this, and I want to call your attention to this idea, right? So this is Rousseau describing the social contract. What does the social contract do, right? And how do we understand it differently on the basis of culture or history than we did on the basis of sort of voluntary agreement, like Locke and Hobbes speculated? And this is the idea for Rousseau, and he has a little bit of trouble formulating this. He doesn't formulate it well here. He doesn't formulate it clearly in the social contract either, and lots of doctoral dissertations have been written trying to sort out exactly what Rousseau means by a social contract. And we'll see, right? Nietzsche returns to this problem later on. But the idea that they unite their wills into a single will. In the social contract, he calls this the general will. And for Rousseau, the general will, I mean, it's kind of like culture itself. It is it's a construct that substitutes for history, God or nature or something like that as the limiting principle of morality. And it works within a specific culture and a specific history, if that makes sense, right? So the general will of the French is a will that is grounded in the history and culture of the French people. And it imposes limits on what they're able to do and in some ways what they're able to think. And that's different from the cultural history of the Germans or the Czechs, to say nothing of the Indians, right? So how this plays out, what authority you should give to this general will is not clear. People object to the general will in ways that they don't object to natural law. It's not quite clear why, except it seems more problematic in some ways and more subjective in some ways. But really, natural law is pretty subjective too when you think about it. So this social contract as general will, right? And when we move into Kant next week, Kant talks a lot about the will and exactly what that is. So Kant has a somewhat better understanding of it, I think, than Rousseau does, although it's still a kind of a slippery concept. Raise questions in the forum. Okay, so 863, he kind of is beginning to sum up. And he says, if we follow the progress of inequality in these various revolutions, we will find that the first stage was the establishment of the law and of the right of property. The second stage, so we're now in civil society, right? So somebody has said, this is mine, and he's the true founder. The second stage was the institution of the magistracy. And the third and final stage was the transfer of legitimate power into arbitrary power. And of course, this is where they have wound up in France. Look what he goes on to say, and this actually is what I had said before, right? The vices that make social institutions necessary are the same ones that make their abuses inevitable, right? Greed, lust, self admiration, right? Self-esteem, right? All of these things are the ones that make human institutions vulnerable to various abuses. Okay. So, yeah, top of 864, right? He's got a reference that we can see to Donald Trump, although we all feel this, right? It's just that Trump really exemplifies it more powerfully than perhaps a lot of us do. It is to this ardor for making oneself the topic of conversation, to this furor to distinguish oneself, which nearly always keeps us outside ourselves, right? Now, this is an interesting problem, right? Look on 860, that's 864. 865, second column, sort of in the middle of that long paragraph. Such, in fact, is the true cause of all these differences. The savage lives in himself. The man accustomed to the ways of society is always outside himself and knows how to live only in the opinion of others. So for Rousseau, the problem, one of the problems of society is that we live outside of ourselves. Being outside of yourself, having interests perhaps that are not fully compatible with yourself, right? This is what Marx calls alienation, right? That you are outside of yourself, that you are estranged, you're alienated from yourself. And this is what happens. This is the problem of the modern world, right? That this self-alienation is happening in society. For Rousseau, has to happen in society, has to happen through culture and through cultural institutions and property and inequality and all of those things. Because we have to live in a world that is, we have to live in the world that culture has created. We're not free to go back and start over. I think you can see that the French Revolution in some ways is a naive reading of Rousseau, that the revolutionaries believed that you could in fact remake human nature. And in some ways this is true of communism as well. right? That you can, in fact, go back, correct culture's mistakes, and then move forward, right? It turns out the problem with that is you have to kill a lot of people in order to do that. And that's, political science could be an experimental discipline, as long as you don't pay attention to the subjects of your research or care about whether you kill them or not. And that's, we've kind of drawn the line there, rightly or wrongly. Actually, if you go back a couple of paragraphs on 865, he is explicit about this, right? He will see the solution to an infinity of moral and political problems. This is in the beginning of the paragraph that starts on 860 on the first column on 865. He will see the solution to an infinity of moral and political problems which the philosophers are unable to resolve. He will realize that since the human race of one age is not the human race of another age, the reason why Diogenes did find his man is because he searched among his contemporaries for a man who no longer existed. And you remember Diogenes, he was the guy that walked through Rome with a lantern looking for an honest man. He couldn't find one. He couldn't find an authentic, heroic Roman that he wanted to find. Why? The human race of one age is not the human race of another age. You look around, the people that you know now are cultural products of the latter part of the 20th century. You would look in vain for those kinds of people in the 18th century or in the 14th century or in the 3rd century BC, right? And by the same token, you would not find 3rd century BC or 15th century or early 20th century people even living today, because we evolve. Not physically, mentally, right? The brain gets rewired in the course of cultural development. And that's inevitable. It is irreversible, Rousseau thinks. He's probably right about that. And it means that we can't rely on constants in human nature, except inequality, oppression, right? Inequality emerges from society. Inequality comes from progress, from history, from property, from all of the things that we have built up over millennia. So at the end, right, Rousseau is in agreement with Marx and, Hobbes, and, well, he's in agreement with Marx too, but Hobbes and Locke, right, that the passions set the goals for reason. Reason itself is an invented tool, a human construction. And history is the medium in and through which humans exist. And human culture, then, is the mental map that we carry around with ourselves, that helps us make sense of the world. But listen to that phrase, right? Make sense. Sense is not something that comes to us. Sense is something that we have to make, we have to construct. So this is Rousseau's point, right? We do this with the materials that culture furnishes us. It's not innate ideas. It's not divinely implanted. It's cultural. And culture is the thing that gives us the meaning of the world and creates tremendous amounts of misery and all that too. So there's Rousseau. We'll start on Locke, Kant on Monday.